Greetings, chess fans. My name is Arturs Neiksans. I'm the Latvian leading chess grandmaster, and I'm back with yet another episode in my video series Inside the Mind of a Grandmaster, since I'm an active grandmaster myself. I played this particular game last weekend in Swedish league, or the so-called Elitserien, the highest league in Sweden. It's a team match. I'm playing for my team Stockholm Rockaden since, I don't remember, 2016, 17, maybe 17, something like that. And ever since I won for the team 3 gold medals. So yeah, I'm one of the foreign players. The other one, by the way, is also a well-known commentator, Jon Ludwig Hammer. So anyway, in this game, I was playing with the black color against Andreas Persson, who is rated 2170, and I hadn't really done any prep before the game, because one of the perks of the Swedish league is that essentially you can shuffle the lineup within some threshold until the almost very start of the round, meaning the lineups are announced 15 minutes until the start of the game. So this means you can't do any prep. So my opponent opened up with d4, and what do I know? I don't know the guy, I don't know what he plays. Guess what? I decided to play the Dutch defense again. So those of you who might be wondering about the Dutch defense, I have released a chessable course on it. It's called Leningrad Dutch Simplified. It was released in March 2024 on Chessable, so you can go check it out. The link is in the video description. So my opponent played knight f3, knight f6, g3. So this is one of the main setups that most players, at least at the competitive level, they really like to play. So the big idea is that White is giving his Latvian bishop the longer diagonal, and then in the long run, White supposedly has better prospects to fight for some of the critical squares in the center. So I play bishop g7, castles, all of this is pretty standard. Unlike one of my previous games that I covered in the previous video in Bundesliga, one of my opponents had spent here already half an hour. This time this was not the case. I mean, Andreas was playing much faster, and now he played b3. Now this is a very cautious move, which I think I covered in my chessable course. But again, the move order can be really tricky. So what White is doing, White wants to put the bishop on b2 before Black is able to play, d6, c5. So for example, there's one idea, White plays c4, d6, and let's say White plays b3, with the idea to put the bishop on b2. Now Black gets to play e5, and now in many lines, White cannot take the pawn on e5 without any consequences, because the rook at a1 is hanging. So that's essentially the idea, that sometimes White starts with this move, and only then plays bishop b2, obviously c4, and wherever, the knight on c3 or knight on d2. Now, one thing I know about chess is I am a pretty firm believer that there's a principle: if you close some doors, you open new ones. So by playing b3, White essentially commits himself to the b3 move, because sometimes White wants to play b4. And also there's a trick. If I will play b4 immediately, then Black can play either knight c6 or d5, transposing to some sort of stonewall position where White might have some difficulties of pushing c4. So there are always nuances. Anyway, he played b3, d6, bishop b2, c6. I played all of this pretty quickly. My opponent played c4. And yeah, for this game I decided to try to play a5, which is pretty standard way. I mean, there is also an idea to play knight e4, like here. Knight e4, knight c3, takes, and sometimes Black wants to play knight e7, maybe queen e8 or queen c7 and push e5. Also another idea could be to play queen c7 immediately, and now if White plays knight c3, I get to push e5, and if White puts the knight on d2, then these knights are sort of taking away the oxygen from each other. So there's many tricks, but yeah, I just decided a5 is going to be good for the game. So the point is, I want to play knight a6 and then decide how to progress with the center. My opponent played knight c3, which is reasonable. I played knight a6, and now comes the first move, which, at least on an emotional level, I thought it's a mistake. My opponent played a3. Now, you're probably wondering why? Why this would be even me a mistake? Let me explain you. So, the first thing, why white actually wants to play a3. He wants to play queen c2 and push e4, which, by the way, very often is the common misunderstanding for white, because white thinks that the best way to play against the Dutch is to push e4, which is wrong. Because why would you want to open up the f-file for the rook and the long diagonal for the Lasco bishop? So this pawn on e7 becomes slightly weak after a couple of trades, but the point is black gets a lot of dynamics. And this is very often what white doesn't understand. So the point is, white wants to play a3 to pursue not the best plan. So the same applies also for rook e1 and e4. I don't think this is particularly dangerous. And the strongest way to play against the Dutch is to be purely positional. Do not rush. But not everybody can do it. So there's also some other ideas like pushing d5 here. Maybe you're going to notice there's going to be some similarity what recently, by the way, Gotham just played in his unfortunately unsuccessful New York tournament, pinning the knight on c3. But what I wanted to add about this, that black does not want to trade these pieces. Black wants to keep on the board as many pieces as you can, and even if by trading a couple of minor pieces on c3, black gets a fine game, this is not in the spirit of the Leningrad. So the point here, black should play e5, bishop takes on e6, and some capture obviously, and have a lot of pieces on the board and plenty of dynamics. But now there's a nuance. So if white plays a3, now, for example, if let me just make some random move. Let's say I play queen c7, I want to push e5, and he plays d5. Now there's this very unpleasant idea. That's a weakness. So I want to play knight c5 and push a4. Or I want to play knight g4, knight e5, push a4, and he is going to have massive problems to defeat the pawn on c4 because the pawn on b3 lacks support of the pawn on a2. Not even mentioning some ideas like knight c5 and queen b6 and hammering the pawn on b3. So that's why I'm saying, I mean, this a3 is like, Engine says it's not a big deal, but when I saw it, I thought, fantastic. And there was an idea that I wanted to employ ever since the creation of my chessable course, and that is the idea of pushing b5, b4. And I already don't remember in which lines they feature, and I was trying to figure out, should I play bishop d7, b5, b4, or should I play rook b8, b5, b4? I maybe keep the bishop on c8 for different goals. But what I could not understand is that what happens if white plays something else, like I don't know. Yeah, somehow this rook b8 didn't feel right. I mean, okay, probably I'm not really sure about this move d5. I was thinking maybe playing knight c5, queen b6, and then I start to wonder what my rook is doing on b8. So anyway, maybe it doesn't really matter. Maybe it's the same, either rook b8 or bishop d7, but I decided to play bishop d7 with the idea that I still want to play b5. And if he wants to play d5, now you see I have not committed to rook b8, and I could immediately proceed with queen b6, knight c5, maybe knight g4, knight e5, a4, and get to this pawn on either c4 or b3. So, if he doesn't do that, I want to push b5. My opponent went here, queen c2, and I play b5. But before I did it, I had to make sure that the following trick does not work for white. Now let me show you maybe a different version. Let's say white play rook c1. Now after b5, I had a vague memory there was a high-level game between, I don't remember who. I think it was Boris Gelfand against Alexander Grishuk, one of these super players. And it featured the move knight e5. And I try to recall, is this the moment when knight e5 works? So the point here is that white wants to kill the rook on e8 and offer some sacrifices. Like, if I take it, first I have to calculate what happens here. So the point is after queen takes on a8, d takes on e5, my bishop on d7 is hanging. So I would have to include e takes on d4 and then take on a8. White gives intermezzo check and I play e6. And it seems I'm winning material like queen takes on d4, knight takes on d5, and white is not in time to take on d5. So I have to make sure that all of this works. And also the same problem is that after d takes on e5, I have knight e4. But in that game, for some reason, this maneuver was not possible. I really don't remember. Maybe there was something like queen d5 and e6 or whatever. You know, I don't remember. So that's why when I was pushing b5, I had to make sure already here that basically after any other sensible move, b5 is going to work to make sure I'm not blundering knight e5. So he played queen c2, and now I'm pretty sure that I can play b5 because now c takes, and knight e5 just makes no sense because even in this line, I can just safely capture an a8, and after d takes on e5, you see the queen on d1 is no longer hitting the bishop on d7. So what happened is after b5, my opponent played knight e2, and I instantly felt this is not a good move because you should not voluntarily move away pieces from the center that stand well, even though white is creating some sort of a threat. And according to an engine, white should have played e3 and be extremely chill about it. An engine really likes this position for white, so I would have played like rook b8 and knight e2, and maybe something like h6 to meet knight e4 with some g5 ideas. I thought this is a very unusual position, maybe not h6, maybe something else, but I felt that I'm doing okay. So my opponent played knight e2, so I had to respond with rook b8, and now there's a trick actually I should be aware of. So he could sacrifice a piece on c6, which looks very unusual, but the idea is that there's concretely c takes on b5. So I cannot take with the bishop rook b5 because of queen c4 check. You see, I'm simply dropping the rook. But I had seen this, that I can take with the rook on b5, and now he has no check on c4, and takes, there's no a4. I mean, I can take on e2, I can play knight b4 intermezzo move, so this threat doesn't really work. So after rook b8, my opponent decided to play e3, which is pretty decent, I suppose. And yeah, I mean, for the most of the time, I was wondering when is the right moment to push b4, because I had a memory, if I may go back from the course, that there were some positions when, let's say, white plays something like this, whatever, I play b4, I get to put the knight on b4, and I get to somehow push e5. I had some memories about this, so meaning I get this, so I have worse pawn structure at the queen side, but because of my beautiful knight on b4 and the strong center on e5, I am actually doing fantastic. But I was not really sure if this is the case, because, for example, in the fourth position, white can also play knight a4, play c5, and fix the weakness on b6. So there's that. Oh yeah, by the way, I completely forgot. He could have played e4 as well. So this was obviously one of the things I had to calculate before pushing b5. And now the point is after b4, e5, I do not take on c3 like this. You see, we just trade a lot of pieces and not necessarily in black's favor. But what I saw is that I can at least take on e5 and play knight g4. So his knight on c3 is hit, the pawn on e5 is under attack, and let's say after knight a4, I thought maybe queen c7 or something, or maybe it was like b takes on a3, let's say he takes the rook, I play knight b4, queen c7. I was not really sure how to evaluate this position, but I thought it's interesting, you know, like it's interesting complexity. And this is, by the way, one of the reasons why I really like the Dutch. But I mean, of course, so nobody stops me from just taking on c4. I could even go here, like takes, and maybe take it here and play rook b8, and maybe even knight c5 is incoming at some point because the bishop on b2 is under attack. So there was many ideas. Yeah, my opponent decided not to go there. He played knight e2. I played rook b8, and now he played e3. So I was thinking how to proceed, so b4 is obviously met with knight a4, but I can grab the center, so I decided to do it. But I was not entirely sure about it, because, for example, this position, d takes, d takes, let's say he decides to include c takes, and something like rook c1. I wasn't sure how to evaluate this, because, I mean, I do have the strong center of the pawns, but the point is, my opponent is pretty active at the queen side. So I have a poor knight on a6. I mean, I could play b4, maybe activate it, but I'm about to play e4, lock away his bishop, while opening his other bishop on b2. I am having some space advantage, and maybe potentially I can play queen e7, bishop e6, targeting the pawn on b3. So I thought that probably I'm not worse, at least. But again, I was like not sure, and neither was my opponent, because he decided to play knight e2, another step back with a piece, and now I realized I have only one real option. So the pawn on e5 is under attack. If I play queen e7, he plays queen c3, hits the pawn on e5, and hits the pawn on a5. A bit unusual, but it's a double attack. I was thinking about the cautious move e4, but then he plays bishop e5, and suddenly he gets a lot of activity, like rook d1, rook c1, maybe put a queen on b2. This bishop e5 is super annoying. Then I thought, I mean, of course I could play a rook e8. Sorry, yeah, here. Rook e8. But it just feels so weird. Like, he could play knight f3. If I play knight e4, there's knight e5. And if I play like knight e4, rook d1. And one of the things that I strongly believe, which maybe is the reason why I'm a grandmaster, is that I believe in the rule of the position's harmony. Meaning, you have to try to get to a position where it makes sense. Yeah, where all the pieces are supporting each other. Where it doesn't feel like all the pieces are gathered in the same room by accident. So that's why I'm looking at this and I don't develop any feeling for harmony that my pieces are somehow connected. Meaning the knight a6 is whatever doing, the knight e4 is great, but what about the other pieces? The rook e8 is a bit weird, the king is weakened a bit. So I thought, no, this is not the right way. And then I was thinking, wait a second. So the most logical move is queen e7, but what about queen c3? And this is when I realized I can actually make out of this normal looking move a trap. So I decided to sacrifice a pawn deliberately. So the point here, I thought if he plays queen c3, I'm playing e4. You can have the pawn on a5, but I'm going to get a lot of time for it, and most importantly, I will get harmony for my pieces. And if my opponent was more experienced, he wouldn't have done it. I mean, this is a devilish trap, and he would have played something else, like maybe rook c1. But, I mean, then again, I can always play maybe e4 with knight c5 and knight e3 ideas, put the bishop on e6 or f7, and I think I'm doing okay. My opponent decided to play queen c3, and I would call it, from my part, a deliberate blunder. So I played e4, and now white basically has to accept the pawn. I mean, ancient says that it's a bit better to play c takes on b5 and then take with a queen. But I play knight c5. You see, I have a very nice outpost on d3. And here, after knight goes f4, I play g5. So where do you go? You have to go back, I guess, right? So bishop takes on f6, queen f6. Here, queen c3. I'm keeping the bishop. And you know what Engine says about this position? It says it's equal. You know, I would never tell that. Like, I mean, I'm looking at this position, and for me, it feels that black is simply dominating the board. Like, okay, maybe not bishop e6 concretely, but it just feels like I have so many active pieces. The knight is going to d3. This knight is completely disconnected. Like, there's also bishop e8 for all I know. I mean, the knight on h5 is somehow completely trapped. I mean, there could be some g4, but it just feels so weird that I would definitely go here. Anyway, my opponent decided to play queen x on a5. I play knight c5. I did not analyze this position deeply. I thought my opponent definitely will be confused in the complications. I was absolutely confident I have more than enough compensation for the pawn, even without any heavy analysis. So the point is, I want to play knight e3 and then try to harass the queen. You look at this bishop on g7, white might have difficulties to place the queen on a secure square. So I was thinking like maybe knight f4, but I play g5. And if he now takes on f6, I take on f6, and rook on a1 is under attack, so he cannot do it. So I thought he probably needs to take on b5 right now. And yeah, I was a bit undecided. I'm gonna take with the pawn or take with the rook, because now after queen c3, I could go knight e3, hit the bishop on b2, threaten with some knight h5 ideas. He goes here, he goes here, and from afar, I thought I'm doing pretty great. Yeah, like maybe knight e5, queen c2, and I did not calculate anything concrete. I just thought if I could somehow, I mean, again, it's like a hypothetical scenario. If I could even somehow get something like this, where I'm down a pawn, I have 4 pawns against 3 at the king side, beautiful knight, bishop on e6, and then I can use these pawns to organize some attack. But I mean, of course, chess is much more concrete than this. But what I'm saying is that I saw that I can play rook b5, knight e3, I saw that I can play c6 on b5, and I was not really stressing myself to calculate anything here deeply. So my opponent played bishop d4, which of course makes sense. He wants to secure the queen on c3 to make sure I'm not causing him any problems. I put the knight on d3, and now came a very big mistake for white. So my opponent decided to play c6 on b5. I had thought he needs to eliminate the knight on d3. So queen c3, by the way, is c5, and now what? You take at f6, you just lose material. So he can't do that, but I thought he has to play like knight f4. And here I thought I'm going to play c5. He can't play bishop c3 because I'm going to trap the queen. I have the other rook to harass, and I have the knight to harass the queen, so it's definitely gone. So he has to take it. I take with the bishop, hit the rook at a1. I want to trap the queen, so he has to play knight e5. At least I thought so. And here I thought, again, I have at least a compensation. I get a feeling I'm better. Later engine would confirm that I'm even much better, because the knight on d3, I have some kingside attack ideas, and maybe I can just even play positionally like b takes and rook b2, and it's not even clear what white's supposed to do. But actually engine says that all of this is not very accurate, because white can take on d3, give up the exchange, and concretely here give a check. If the king walks, he gives queen c3, queen d3, and now he collects a pawn on b5. So he gets 2 pawns for the exchange. I go for a crazy attack with f4, like g takes at f4, I think it's some queen g4, queen e2 ideas, and it suddenly becomes very uneasy for white. I play g5, queen e2 is incoming, and engine says this is somehow equal. Probably engine is right. Yeah, I'm very active. I don't have so many pawns left, and somehow this is equal. So, yeah, I mean, he didn't pick it up. He played immediately c6 on b5, which is just a blunder because I don't have to take the pawn on b5, but my big goal is here. So I play c5. I already had planned this move before, and now the point is he has no good squares to retreat for the bishop. If he plays bishop c3, I'm trapping the queen, and there's no other squares really. So he had to take at f6. Now I'm threatening rook a8, I'm threatening to collect rook at a1, and I thought he has to play like knight c4, and I'm gonna take on a1, I'm gonna take on, I'm not sure, maybe with the bishop or even the rook, yeah, maybe with the rook, queen c3 and rook b8. So white is essentially choosing, should he suffer for a long time or end the game painless. So my opponent decided to end the game painless, he played a4, protected the pawn, hoping for a miracle, which was never coming. So I play rook a8, queen c7, And now I'm a bit mad to myself that I played rook fc8, which is trapping the queen, but it just prolongs the game. So I was thinking, is there correct mode to play bishop e5 or rook c8? So I was thinking I can go here and trap the queen like this. So the queen is trapped. You see no good squares for the white queen. And I was thinking, can I go like this? And now again play bishop e5. Oh, sorry, not queen c7. Here, 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 and this. And I convinced myself that with the bishop on f6, it feels more natural for some reason. So I decided to play, rook c to b8. No, sorry. Yeah, instead of bishop e5, I decided to play rook after c8. And now I realized actually here, he has knight takes on e4. And suddenly I have to calculate things like, if I take on b7, he takes on f6, he takes on b7, rook a7. I mean, I have the queen, but for the rook and 3 pawns. Even though they're easily blocked, but I mean, this requires some technique. So I was quite angry about it, that I missed it, that I relaxed too early. So probably I can just take it here, and he could give me a check maybe, or maybe even a check before, but when taking on d5. Now take on e4, take it here, and queen d3, and he somehow lives. You know, I was just quite angry about it. So the point is that if I would here start with this, then he simply doesn't have these options anymore. Like here, I don't see how he can now take on e4. The bishop is not standing on f6, and now this would be pretty clean. But anyway, I mean, it's still winning according to an engine. It's just inaccuracy. He could have prolonged the game, but my opponent already had basically resigned in his mind, and after knight b4, he just stopped the clock. So the lesson is, never ever relax too early. So that's it. That was a pretty quick game. Already by move 20, I was winning with black in the Dutch defense. So if you like the game, if you like my video recap, please press like and subscribe to my channel, as I'm slowly growing and I'll be making more videos. Thank you for watching. I'm signing off.